Welcome to TradeTheNBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 11th of May. Well, Friday was a continuation of the same. We moved right back up towards the highs as we see the 100% mark of the Fibonacci lines fading down. So the question really, well, we kind of talked about it. We figured that we were going to be moving across at this particular point, just back and forth as this high dips and will eventually reach a matching point. We still have rising shakeout, and but now we're almost reaching with, if you look at the shakeout down here, the blue, hard to see that line, but the blue is getting close to the azure and gold that have flattened out. And when that finally reaches, then we could look for, well, a little bit more exacting movement. But at the end of the day, everybody is just focused on the Fed. I mean, as you see more and more earnings come out, they're just absolutely dismal, and everyone's just talking about, EPS and things like that. And as I've pointed out for quite some time here, that it's really irrelevant, because as you add these trillions of dollars in manufactured money, while they don't represent anything in real terms now, at some point they become monetized, meaning that money actually gets into the system. This was something that was worried about when we had the early money flowing in from the financial crisis. And what happened with it was, though, none of it really turned into actual money because it was used to buy up mortgage-backed securities and things like that. At a certain point, though, this gets put into the market, which is why we saw record highs with the market. And it changes the multiple of the market. And the expectation is, though, that as you decrease the value of the dollar, potentially over time, which is exactly what's going to happen with this kind of money inflow, a reading of 3,000 on the S&P is really cut in half. So to be where you were before the crisis of the pandemic started, you would have to be relatively close to a 6,000 S&P, which I know sounds absolutely insane. So the fact that we're only at 2,900 is actually relatively low in respect to that, if you can put it in that context. So it's just important to understand that broader dynamic when you're thinking about market and general valuations and the way the future value of money is perceived. So I just thought I'd throw that one out there, just from a pure economic standpoint. Turning to the NASDAQ, well, we've got a little magenta candle building here as we see some short-term weakness. We didn't have a dip of the cyan going below green and red, but it is kind of been fluctuating back and forth with it. So even if we get some momentary weakness within this setup, we had a positive extreme from the other day, well, pretty close to it. It's only yellow, but that's enough to usually get some type of backfill into it. Doesn't mean we still aren't going to continue to move higher than that, but I think you're going to just see a lot more of this uncertainty, because again, it's a very small number of companies that really are representing the expansion value, or at least the hold-in value in the markets, and most of them are tech related anyway, which is why the NASDAQ has outperformed. And again, Euro is exactly in line, and this is also an interesting one. I don't think we've seen this before, this universal dynamic of central banks around the world all applying the similar amount of stimulus vis-a-vis just arbitrary creation of money. And it's interesting, if they all do it together, will that actually generate any imbalances and or broader inflationary pressures? This is a really interesting time from a unique macro standpoint worldwide, because if everybody's doing it, then is there really any net differential or cumulative effect? So that has yet to be determined. I don't think we've ever seen this experiment before, so it'll be the first in monetary policy to find out. And firsts are always interesting, because the uniqueness of them allows for such a variation in interpretation that volatility always has to come with that. From an oil standpoint, again, it's still remaining low. We're going to start to see some changes potentially here as certain areas in America are opening up. Certain areas here in Italy have begun their start back up, though it's going to be sporadic, and I've yet to see an economic model that will justify this staggered open of various things in a staggering range. I just don't see the effectiveness. And I think that the drain on capital could be significant because as people take risks in an uneven exposure, there's going to be significant losses taking place because if you don't have the capacities in that are underlying that are allowed to participate, which is what you get with this kind of artificial restriction. I just don't think that dynamic works, but it's going to play out here, and we're going to see it. And you're going to see it where places like Sweden and some of these others that didn't do the lockdowns and have maintained their economies, whether or not they are able to really take advantage of the weakness and displacement in other areas and outshine dramatically. So that'll be something definitely to be keeping an eye on in the next few months. From a gold standpoint, again, still in this elevated territory. It's just going to be a matter of time before, like I said, when there's a realization of the monies that are being put into a lot of these securities and things like that, when it actually gets placed into the marketplace. And that doesn't count when you're talking about either buybacks or stock. It's actually the turning of that digital cash into real monies that will make the difference, which is why you really can't flip to a all digital situation, because that would exacerbate the problem as opposed to having this mix of actual physical cash versus electronic money. From an intraday standpoint, you can see the early action took it up, and then we just had this broad move going across as things stabilized. And then we broke out to a move, but again, we created the dip below the red line, which took place right here, and then we had a previous one from right there. And guess what? In pre-market, we filled exactly all of that, as well as all of the positive extremes from the breakout, even when futures took a little dip and then popped up. So you took out people who had stops below, drove it up, took out short interests, and then there was just nothing. And then we're right back to another algo level for basic support right here at the 28.92 range. And it's just that simple. I think that kind of really shows it all. This has just been fantastic as far as following those range moves. I think even the colors on that chart pretty much depicted in this. This is a paint 2 on the 5K. So it's exactly as you would expect when you get this kind of taking advantage of weaknesses in an algorithm setup. And this is exactly what we look for, because that's what generates the best volatility moves, where they see an imbalance where we've created one with the positive extremes, and then they just allow it to then be filled back. And then oftentimes the weight of its own momentum usually will cause a pass-through, whether it's to the upside or to the downside. And that's exactly what we have here. So all good stuff. And finally feeling better from my food poisoning. This is always a thing that, when you eat healthy like this and then you decide to order something that comes from America to try, it never works out really well when you add in those preservatives that your body's not used to or whatever. So you learn your lesson. As always, though, we will continue to post relevant ideas and charts on the Skype chat. Trade well. We'll talk to you later.